Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Adam Lang. Last week, some of the most significant industrial relations reforms in decades passed the House of Representatives. These changes range from allowing multi-employer bargaining to banning pay secrecy clauses in contracts. Next week, the legislation goes to the Senate and the government is bracing for a battle to get it through with the crossbench wavering. These are very significant reforms, so I wanted to get a feel for how they'll impact businesses and workers right across the country. Lewis Izzo is the Managing Director, Sydney Workplace, for the Australian Business Lawyers and Advisors. Lewis, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. First, let's look at multi-employer bargaining. I've got a few questions about this one. Why has it been proposed? How exactly does it work? And how is it different to the current system?
Sure. Well, I think to answer your first question, why has it been proposed? I think there's a sense from the union movement that in some sectors, they've struggled to get kind of the momentum to get enterprise agreements up in particular areas because they might not have the density of membership, or they just might not have the kind of industrial muscle to force enterprise agreements in certain industries where there traditionally haven't been any. And also, additional to that, in some sectors, there's a huge amount of anxiety around outsourcing. And so in some ways, these have been called the Qantas reforms, because if you think about the Qantas business model, where you have an employer that traditionally did a whole range of things, might be cleaning, cabin crew, baggage handling, all those things, and gradually one by one, they get outsourced out to cheaper labour models. And what these reforms are designed to achieve is to bring all of that back to the mothership again, and to have in a ecosystem, like it could be in aviation or it could be in road transport, a scenario where all the key stakeholders, all the key players or employers are back bargaining together again. And the idea is the unions will be able to lift the terms and conditions by getting all the key employers that have formed part of an ecosystem together at the table together. So that's why. So in terms of how exactly does it work, it's going to be quite a technical process. Basically what happens is, once a union, and this is primarily designed at unions, has identified that they want to bargain with a range of employers, they will need to establish that a majority of employees at each of those employers want to bargain together. They'll need to convince the Fair Work Commission of that. And then they will need to demonstrate that there is some clearly identifiable common interests between the employers. And the Act gives you some examples of what might be considered, things like geographic location, nature of the business, whether they're under the same regulatory regime. And so they need to show the Commission we have this majority of employers want to bargain with these other employers. Each of these employers have something in common that means it's appropriate and not against the public interest to rope all these people together. Once the unions have successfully roped them all together, the employers are bound to bargain in this multi-stream. So that is, they are fused all together. They are then subject to what we call good faith bargaining obligations, which means they have to participate in the process in good faith. They can be subject to industrial action for this multi kind of employer agreement. And ultimately, if the parties can't achieve a consensus, the Fair Work Commission is empowered to make a declaration that the bargaining can't resolve and actually arbitrate an outcome. That is, determine what the terms and conditions are. So there's quite a lot of rigid process in there. But the upshot for business, and this is what's really interesting, is we're going from a system where you used to reach agreement with your employees in an enterprise to get a collective agreement up. We're moving very much into a different world now of imposing terms and conditions. And the reason I say that is that the employers, once they're in this multi-bargaining stream, under the current proposed amendments from the government, they cannot put the EA out to vote unless all union bargaining representatives agree. So the unions have a power of veto. So what that means is that the businesses either need the union's consent to put the EA to vote, or if they can't reach consent, you're likely to end up in an arbitration before the Fair Work Commission, and the Fair Work Commission will impose what the terms should be. So once you're in this stream, terms are going to be imposed on you one way or another. They're going to be imposed by the union or the Commission. So it's a very different world we're moving to.
It sounds like quite the process. Does it feel to you, Lewis, like there's just going to be more people involved in getting these deals done?
More people involved, and what that means is two things. One, it's going to take a lot longer. I mean, if you ask businesses that currently just bargain for their own enterprise with a couple of unions, they will tell you that often having multiple bargaining representatives in there makes things more difficult because they have different interests. Now imagine not only talking about maybe multiple unions, but 4 or 5 multiple employers, all with different interests, all perhaps willing to accept different things. It's going to take a lot of time. And what we're going to see is business needing to invest much more significantly in this type of employee relations activities where they might have been able to get through a bit more smoothly in the past.
Stay with me, Lewis. We'll be back in a minute. I'm speaking to Lewis Izzo, Sydney Managing Director of Australian Business Lawyers and Advisors. So, Lewis, there's a few carve-outs involved so far in the legislation, like businesses with fewer than 15 employees or the entire commercial construction sector. What impacts do these carve-outs have?
Yeah, so the commercial construction sector is out. I think the government's recognised that there's a very high level of bargaining in that sector. It doesn't need to be aided by these types of laws. So that's a good thing for businesses that already deal with quite a robust union in the CFMEU, which is has got enough muscle. It doesn't need any extra regulation for that union to achieve what it seeks in that industry. You've pointed out the small businesses, so that's 14 employees or less are carved out. The other really big carve out is someone who already has an enterprise agreement that is in its current term. And so what that means is that there's going to be a real focus on businesses locking in their terms to try and avoid being roped in with other employers. So if you've got, and we're seeing this already from a number of clients, they're trying to bed down their EAs right now, because what we're going to see businesses want to do is try and ensure that their EAs don't expire at the same time as others that might be roped in together with them, competitors or other businesses in the same area. And what we're going to see businesses do is try and stagger when their enterprise agreements expire so that they can rely on that exemption, which is you can't have an application to rope you into this bargaining process if your EA has still got time to run before its expiry date.
And Lewis, what about the role of the Fair Work Commission? How do you foresee that might change?
So there's a big shift here for the Commission, not just in bargaining, in other elements of the reforms as well, towards more arbitration. So what I mean by that is instead of the Commission being used as a mediator to help resolve differences or disputes, which is their current role in bargaining, there's more of a final say, or using the Commission as the ultimate umpire. So for all bargaining disputes, whether it's multi-bargaining or single enterprise bargaining now, if the parties can't reach consensus, the Commission will determine what your EA says. And that's a significant shift in the regulatory regime. And what it means is I think the stakes are going to be higher. We're going to see a lot more compromise, I suspect, from business towards union claims, because if you can't reach agreement and you can't get the vote up, it's not the case that you can just stay on the old agreement terms or anything like that. Terms can actually be forced upon you. So I think people will need to be more realistic in terms of what they seek as the bargained outcomes, because you can't just put your pay increase at X amount and the unions are at Y amount and you say, well, I'm not going to budge at all, because if you don't think your position's defensible, you ultimately won't succeed in arbitration. So I think it will achieve what the government's looking for, really, which is to see an increase in terms and conditions overall. I think businesses are going to have to take this very seriously, because whatever position they adopt needs to be one they can defend in an arbitration. And so we are going to see also a lot more arbitrations in the coming years.
Right. So, Lewis, there's also some mentioning about flexible work arrangements. What are the changes to the ways employees can contest decisions made about those flexible working arrangements?
Yeah, so by way of background for everyone's refreshment, certain people have a right to make flexible work requests under the Act. They're quite a large group. You've got people over 55, people with children of school age, so that's 18 and under effectively, people with a disability, people caring, victims of domestic violence, and there's a couple of other smaller categories as well. But when you think about that, there's quite a large group of individuals who currently have this right to request a flexible work arrangement. Now, under the current laws, the employer needs to respond to the request, but the employer can refuse on reasonable business grounds, and there's not much the employers can do about it. Under the changes, there's two changes. The first is that not only do you need to respond to the request, but there's a lot more process built up around that response process. You need to genuinely consider what's been raised. You need to discuss alternatives with the employee before refusing. And so the kind of response process is a lot more rigid. But the real kicker here is if you refuse the request, and again, your only basis to refuse is reasonable business grounds, and the employee disputes that refusal, then the employee can file a claim in the Fair Work Commission, and the Fair Work Commission can determine whether your refusal was reasonable. And if the Commission thinks that there's been some problem, some deficiency in the process, or it doesn't agree with your refusal, it can do all sorts of things. It can order that you do accept the flexible work request. It can order you to revisit part of the process. It can order that the request should not be granted. It's got a full range of powers. And so again, what we're going to see is that employers are going to have to take these flexible work requests much more seriously. If someone says that they want to work from home 2 days a week, or they want to shift their hours to come in earlier and finish later, simply saying, oh, that doesn't suit me, I don't like it, and telling the employee no is not going to cut it. You're going to need to have a very good objective basis to demonstrate why it doesn't work with your business operationally. Because if you can't agree with the employee, again, the Commission's going to make its own mind up.
In a similar theme, but perhaps a different aspect, the reforms are aiming to improve gender equity in the workplace. What does this look like under this proposed legislation for business?
Well, you've mentioned one of the gender equity reforms in your intro, which pertains to pay secrecy clauses. So there's a sense that having pay being a confidential matter holds back people who may be underpaid or undervalued, particularly in female-dominated industries, from understanding what their male equivalents are earning. So pay secrecy clauses in contracts are banned. And so that's really about just facilitating more open access, I suppose, to others understanding what their colleagues are paid. I'm not convinced how much change we're going to see on that front, because I think pay is still very much a sensitive taboo topic, and I don't think the moment these bans come in that all employees around the country are going to start sharing their pay with everyone else. But you may see some changes there. The bigger change is they're setting up a specialist gender equity panel in the Commission with expertise in this area to hear what we call equal remuneration claims. So that is claims where a industry appears to have market rates of pay that undervalue the work, and that's because historically it's been female dominated effectively. And what they've done is traditionally these types of claims, we've only seen 2 of them in the last 12 years. One was in the social, community, housing, disability sector, and the other was in the childcare sector. But these claims, they had a lot of difficulty trying to demonstrate that the amount that these employees were earning was different to a male comparator in a different industry. And they've removed some of these rules about needing to compare to similar work in different industries to try and make it easier to bring one of these equal remuneration claims. And if the equal remuneration claim succeeds, what it does is lift the award rates in that industry by X amount. It could be by 10%, could be by 15%, could be by 20%. And so we're not likely to see dozens of these claims. They're very difficult claims to run. They're quite resource intensive. Our firm's defended the only 2 that have ever been run in the last 12 years since the Fair Work Act's been in place. But I suspect we'll see one of these on an industry-wide basis a year. This isn't the type of claim that gets brought lightly. They're industry-wide proceedings, and they will predominantly relate to the kind of care sectors, the sectors that are female dominated. You think aged care, childcare, potentially any kind of health services with high levels of female participation. So it's not across the board, but it's for certain industries.
Right. Finally, as the Senate considers this legislation, Do you have any advice for businesses trying to get their head around what this means for them?
Uh, yeah, well, it's all moving very quickly as well, which is hard for business. And there's probably going to be some more amendments between now and say the 1st of December, which is the drop dead date for the legislation to be passed this year. I think it will be passed in most of it will be passed at least by 1 December. If you're a business, I think you need to work out the areas that affect you. If you're affected by bargaining, there's a lot to get across. If you're not, you've got a bit more luxury. And I'd be looking at the flexible work request material, and I'd be looking at some of the information pertaining to fixed term contracts, which is another area which we haven't quite covered, but there's going to be some limitation on fixed term contracts. And that's where I'd be focusing my efforts. So trying to get across any information about those two areas so you can properly run your business when you come up with flexible work requests or when you're contracting people. If, however, you are involved in bargaining or you think you might be, there's a whole heap of stuff going on and you're going to have to constantly stay updated over the next 6 months or so as we see this multi-bargaining take shape.
That's terrific advice, Lewis. Thank you very much for talking to Fear and Greed.
No problems. Thanks for having me.
That was Lewis Izzo, Sydney Managing Director of Australian Business Lawyers and Advisors. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Adam Lang. Enjoy your day.